we'll continue with the documentation and talk about working with assets, which are basically our image and sound files in the game. And so when you load the image or sound file, the path to this file is always relative to the HTML file in which your game is running. So the location of your JS files is irrelevant, and so let's assume that you have the following directory structure, and game.js is located by the game HTML. And when you want to load some image from your game, you would basically do the following. You would say that I want to do a new ig.image and pass in the image relative to the HTML of the game. So here, relative to the HTML, it's under the media folder and then the image. So that's why you get media and then some image. And then it works the same way for the sounds. So if you have media, some sound, instead of ig.image, you'll do ig.sound. And the same thing for an animation sheet. You can say ig.animationsheet, pass in the animation sheet, the tile image, the image of all the tiles, and then pass in the size of the frame, the width and the height. So that's how you can pass in your media, basically your image, sound, and animation sheets. And the path someSound.star is actually valid. Impact will load the appropriate sound file depending on the browser's capability. So if you don't want to specify is it MP3 or OGG, you can specify star and allow the appropriate sound file to get loaded. Now, there's another thing, which is using the preloader. So you can preload your sound and image files that your game needs, and to do that, you will okay, so let's go over and click on this preloader documentation here. So here we are basically creating a loader, my loader, which is extending the loader and defining a draw function. And the draw function is then taking ig.system.realWidth, ig.system.realHeight. So this is basically the height and width of your canvas. And filling the canvas with, in this case, black, hash 0, and then zeros. And then filling a rectangle from 0, 0 to width, comma, height. So this is basically canvas operations. If you don't know about the HTML canvas, I recommend you look into that and read up on that. But basically, it's just setting the fill color and then filling a rectangle. So it's turning the canvas black. And then it's calculating a percentage as this dot status times 100, and then rounding that and adding a percentage. Now I'm not sure what this dot status is. Oh, I guess it's I see. So like it's 70% loaded or 30% loaded, because we're basically creating a loader. So I'm guessing the status is going to be a number between 0 and 1. So if it's like 0.3, it'll be 0.3 times 100, which will be 30. And then we'll round that and put a percentage, so it'll be 30%. And we are now changing our fill style to white, and then filling the text as a percentage, basically the 30% or the 70%. And we're putting that in the center of our loader, W/2 and H/2. So right? Okay. So the real width and real height, this is basically the width and height of the loader, which is black in color and has a white text in between as the percentage. And then we are adding this loader to our actual canvas. So that's the ig.main hash canvas, my game, and 60, 320, 242, and my loader. The numbers there, I think, are the frames per second of 60 frames per second on the canvas for the game, with a width of 320 and a height of 240. And I don't exactly remember, or what, I wonder what that 2 is. Maybe we can confirm. So let's go over to try to find out. So 2 is the scale. It's optional. And scaling of the game screen, example, a width of 320 and a scale of 2 will result in a 640 pixel wide canvas element. And the default is 1 without the scaling. Okay, so I don't typically scale my canvases, but you can if you need to. Like, I just make the actual width and height the size I want. But I can see why you might want to scale depending on the screen size. So description, the loader is the default preloader for all the images and sounds that the game needs. It shows a white progress bar on a black background. And you can subclass the ig.loader to provide your own drawing code or do some additional processing. And note that while the canvas and its drawing context are available when the preloader is executed, you can't use any of this image and sound resources yet. All right, and so now you have the loader constructor, ig.loader, game class, and resources. And the resources will be passed in as an array, each of which must provide a .load method that accepts a callback such as ig.image and ig.sound. So the ones we saw image, sound, and AnimationSheets. And was it AnimationSheets or AnimationSheet? I think it was AnimationSheet. AnimationSheet. Okay, so it's nice to know, right? So I don't have to keep looking up. It's not so it's singular, but it's AnimationSheet. Animation is spelled out. The variable name was AnimationSheet. Okay. Yeah, so we basically do new IG image, new IG sound, new IG animation sheet. And then we were talking about this preloading using a loader, which takes the game class and the resources. So the game class, the ig.game class to start, and the resources, and which is an array. Note that an instance of a loader class is usually created by ig.main. And then we've got some properties like done, game class, resources, array, status. So status is basically calculated as a fraction of the resources, not their size. So if you have some big resources, it may not move the same. Okay. I hope it's clear. So basically, if you have like 20 resources and 10 of them have been loaded, it's going to say that 50% is loaded, even if, let's say, a huge resource that is much bigger than everything else remains to be loaded, and so you may actually be less than 50%. Methods, you have a draw method and an end and load resource. So that's for our loader. Let's go back to here. So using our preloader is basically creating so calling the draw method on an image that has not yet been loaded will do nothing. So you don't want to start drawing stuff before loading that stuff. Attempting to play a sound file that's not been loaded will result in a severe lag, so you don't want to do that. So you want to load these things before you try to use them. Okay, so one more thing that we can load is font. So we can now load images, we can load sound. So image, sound, animation sheet, and font. And these are all created during load time and will be appended to the preloader's chain of assets to load. Images and sounds that are only created at runtime will not be loaded by the preloader. So we can also do some runtime creation of images and sounds. Now here we see this code, my game is equal to ig.game.extend. The image will be loaded by the preloader. It was created as soon as the script is executed. Title image is new, ig.image, and media. Okay, so we basically created a new image and set that as a property of the my game, and so it will be loaded by the preloader. Now in the init function, we have another image that we're loading, the media background.png, and that image is not loaded by the preloader. It is loaded when the init method is called, and that will happen after the preloader is finished. So if you want to preload, make them properties. If you want to load them during runtime, put them in the appropriate function such as init. Now caching. So this is very important with assets, right? As all assets are automatically cached, they are only loaded once no matter how often you need them. And if two entities share the same animation sheet image, it will not be loaded twice. So this is perfectly valid. Where you first extend, you create a new IG animation sheet with 16 by 16 frames, and then you again create another animation sheet using the same new animation as 8 by 8. So you can also use this to make sure your background music is loaded by the preloader. You can't use ig.music.add at load time, but you can already load the sound file as an instance of ig.sound. So there's ig.music.add, which allows you to load music at runtime, but you can preload your sound files using ig.sound. So here we are seeing that the music is preloaded. Passing false as the second argument prevents loading this sound as multi-channel. Okay, and in the init function, we are now simply able to say ig.music.add this.background tune, and you can also just specify the path again using ig.music.add and then provide the path if you like. And you are ready to rock by saying ig.music.play. So that's how you can deal with music or sound in your ImpactJS game. All right, so that's essentially it for assets. Let's go back to the docs real quick and the class definitions. So we are going to go to the class reference, and so we covered sound and music. There's also a sound manager. There's fonts and images. So, and the animation and animation sheet, we did a whole video about that, so we're not going to go back over that. Background map also we did. So in terms of graphics, let's go over image, font, and sound, music, and sound manager. So image, we basically just can do ig.image to load it, and image.draw to draw the image at a certain position. We can also draw a tile of the image by specifying image.draw tile, again the position, and then 3,16 tells us that we are drawing tile number 3 with a tile size of 16 by 16 pixels. So note this is a little different from what we have usually been doing of width and height. The 3 here is not the width. The 3 here is the tile number. And 16 is the tile size. All right, and so we can draw the whole image or we can draw a piece of the image if it's a tiled thing this way. Description, I think you get it. It's basically drawing images. Constructor, we said that images are cached. And if necessary, if the engine hasn't completely loaded all required modules denoted by ig.ready, the image is added to the resources to be loaded by the preloader properties, data, failed loaded, path, width, and height. So failed would be if you can't, end up not being able to load it. Loaded tells you if it's been loaded or not. Path tells you where it is, and width and height. Methods are draw and draw tile, which we spoke of. Draw tile can also take a few extra things like flipping it. So if you're grabbing a part of a tile from a tile set, you can also choose to flip the tile, like mirror it along a given axis. And if you omit the tile height, it's the same as the width. That's the assumption there. So, okay, so basically when we said that 3 and 16, we could have also said 3, 16, and 30 or whatever. So if you want to specify, so it basically goes target the position, XY, the tile number, and then the tile width, and then optionally the tile height as well. Otherwise it's going to be the same as tile width, and then flipping X and flipping Y. When you're doing just a draw for the whole image, it's just the XY position and then the draw the whole image, or a part of it when source X, source Y, and width and height are also given. So you can also draw a part of the image using just the draw method without it being tiles. Okay, so that's essentially it for images. And then we said we will talk about fonts. So loading fonts is very easy as well. You simply have to get your font.png file, which is essentially taking the font and putting it as characters in a font image on a line. And there's a font tool which you can use to generate a font image from any installed system font. So if we click over to the font tool here, you can see interestingly, there's not the font, it's not coming. I think this tool may be a little bit broken in that it's not letting me choose other fonts. But yeah, I think this is included in the GitHub though, so we may be able to alter it and grab other font faces and add them. So there's also this Impact Sprite font tool. Let's see. Okay, that one is not there, 404. Okay, so yeah, sadly, we'll have to figure out our own font tool. Maybe I'll figure this out later. But basically, it's just, you just need all the characters in the font in one line. And the bottommost line of the pixels in a font image specifies the character widths for each character, and a run of non-transparent pixels represents a character and its width, and therefore all characters in a font image must be on the same line. All right, so that's how you basically grab a font, right? You just load it as ig.Font, and then you can draw it in a given position, and you can pass in aligning it to the right or left or that kind of thing. That's it for fonts. You can get the height for the string, width for the string, things like that using the methods if you need to, for calculating how big you might want to make a given font. So I'm trying to see, where do you set the font size? The height of the font in pixels. Okay, I think this documentation on fonts could use a little bit more, how do you set the font size and that kind of thing. But I think you'll find examples of that when you look at certain other games and things. So, okay, that's it for this piece. I would say the font documentation's a little poor. Sounds, same thing. You can load them as ig.sound. Like we saw, you can, instead of specifying the .ogg, you can put a star there, and you can stop and play the sound. So I think I cannot. Okay. You can set the channels for the sound. You can use different formats. Is the sound enabled or not? You can set that. So like you can disable all the sounds for the game or enable all the sounds, that kind of thing. There are only two methods really, play and stop, for a given sound file. The properties are loop, path, and volume. So you can choose the volume and choose if the sound's going to keep looping. The default is false. And path is just the image path. So that's that for the sounds. And then we have a sound manager. So music is different from sound, right? So sound is like you want to make a sound when the bullet is shooting or things like that. Music is basically, it inherits from sound, and it can have some track, and those are array of instances of sounds to be played back. Volume is there, random, to choose to play the tracks in a random order or in order. So like as the player is going, like you play some music in the background, and then you can have another track or that plays. You can decide if they loop. So that kind of thing. So this is basically to set the game music. And yeah, that's that for music. Sound manager. The sound manager takes care of loading sounds and providing them for the music and sound instances. An instance of the sound manager is automatically created at sound manager. And it basically has some properties: the sound manager, volume, format, and channels. And that's essentially it for the sound manager. That's the main function. We already talked about it. So yeah, okay. I think that's it for this video. We have gone through the various sound related stuff, image related stuff, font related stuff, and that's basically it for assets. And I will see you in the next video. I guess in the next one we will talk about entities and entity pools.